So today's backdrop is not as organized as I planned because I wasn't actually planning on filming this. This is a lot that I was really excited to get and I was really excited to open, but I just wasn't feeling that great today, so I didn't really want to get on camera to share them. But on going through these, I realized I didn't get as good of a deal as I thought. I thought it might be interesting to show you that, you know, not all lots are created equal. You get lucky, but you also lose out sometimes. So this is probably the most I've paid for a lot ever. Well, it's not true. It's the most I paid for a lot of this quantity. There are 69 of these small envelopes, and then there are 10 larger size ones that haven't come yet. There are 2 McCalls and 2 Butterick, I think, but it's mainly Vogue patterns, and they're mainly from the 1940s and the 1950s. I was sent photos of every pattern, so I don't feel like I was misled. You just can't always tell the condition from simple photos of the fronts of the envelopes. So I paid about $5 a pattern plus shipping, and I usually try to pay closer to half that. So I really paid out for this lot because there were so many size 18s in here and they just looked amazing. There are some really, really unique designs, and that's still true, but the overall condition just isn't as good as I'd hoped it would be. So I probably won't be making as much off this lot as I wanted. I'm not going to be specifying the size of the majority of these because all of the ones I currently have on my table, you're only seeing one stack, but there are like 4 of these stacks, are all size 18, made for a 36-inch bust and 39-inch hips. Right on top here we have a 1940s jacket pattern. I really like this pattern. I'm not going to keep it for myself just because I prefer something with a slightly more cinched in waist, but I do think it's nice and a very practical jacket pattern. As you can tell, the envelope is crushed in here, so this definitely isn't factory folded. In fact, I'm not even sure if I see instructions in there. Here we have one that's probably from the 1950s. This is a short swing coat style. Actually, maybe it is from the 1940s. It doesn't have a date printed on it, but that shoulder line is definitely more something I associate with the 40s. And it has a really interestingly shaped lapel, and this one actually feels like it could be factory folded. It feels very nice and firm. Here's one that feels like it could be factory folded, but upon opening it, I can see a pin through the instructions, which isn't particularly promising, but at least it is nicely folded in there. And this is a more classic 1940s coat design, very broad shoulders on this. It almost looks like football style padding underneath that coat. And it has this interesting detail that goes over top of the shoulder and then goes all the way down to the pocket. Here's a slightly later design with raglan sleeves. Again, a short coat design. I feel like these slot probably all belong to the same person. You can really see their coat preference here in terms of silhouette and length. And this one feels neatly folded, but upon looking in there, I can tell that it is not factory folded. This one feels quite poorly folded. The top of the envelope is very flat and then the bottom is quite puffy. I think you can even see that on camera. But I do see instructions in there, which is good. This envelope does also have a little bit of kind of insect damage to it or mouse damage. I'm not sure which. This is another really bulky shouldered design. It's got kind of an interesting pocket detail though, and it is a longer line. This is my favorite of the coat patterns I've seen in this lot. This one that I'm almost tempted to keep for myself, but I have so many coat patterns. Upon opening this up, it looks neatly folded, but I'm not sure if it is factory folded. This would definitely be from the later 1940s, I would say, and you've got a really broad design, but you've got these larger cut armhole openings, which I think would make it amazing for bulky sweaters. The main reason I'm not keeping this for myself is because it has gathering at the front. Now that looks really nice in the illustration. When you try and pull that off with a heavier wool or some sort of coating fabric, it ends up looking really bulky and unflattering. So I prefer coat patterns that have gourd panels, and that's probably why I won't keep that one. This one doesn't feel like it has very much tissue in it, but it's also a relatively simple pattern. Looking in there, I do see instructions, and I do see neatly folded pieces, so we'll hope it's complete. This is a collared jacket sort of cardigan, and it actually doesn't appear to have a button closure, which is interesting. At a glance, this one looks factory folded, and the instructions are in there too. It's, again, a really broad over-the-shoulder coat style. This one, again, doesn't appear to have any button closures, which is interesting. It's got a neat sort of seaming detail down the back, and it has very interesting pockets too. They kind of go from the side but have these really large pocket flaps with a bound buttonhole on them. Next up, we can go through this lot, and these are some of the first ones they sent me photos of that really got me excited. So this is a Vogue special design. It's a size 18, I can tell. Just barely. Most of the size information is missing. It's torn off the top of the envelope. This one is marked 1955. I do not know if the label is in there. However, it does have instructions and does appear to have nicely folded pieces in there. This one has very nicely folded pieces, but they do not appear to be factory folded. Some patterns, like Hollywood patterns, weren't factory folded in the traditional sense where they're all sort of bundled together with the smaller pieces folded inside the larger pieces. They were just all inserted into the envelope at once. I don't know if Vogue ever did that. In that case, this could potentially be factory folded. It just doesn't have what I traditionally think to be factory folds. However, it does feel very nicely folded in there, and it does have instructions, which is good. This is a cool design. It's got breast pockets and dolman sleeves or kimono sleeves. It's got an asymmetrical button tab detail and is relatively fitted, but it's fitted with pleats as opposed to darts. Again, don't know if this has the label in there, but it would be awesome if it did. And this is marked 1954. Here's another Vogue special design, which is just amazing. This one appears to have instructions. It feels like it could be factory folded, but I see two folded pieces of tissue in there, so potentially they folded the cape and the dress pattern separately. This does have a cape pattern, which is amazing. Look at how beautiful that is. And then the dress that's underneath is pretty amazing too. It's got these fitted seams with these little tab details coming out at the bodice. And this is copyright 1955. This pattern has instructions and the tissue appears to be neatly folded. It is a dicky and a collar and a capelet and a cuff set, so an interesting variety of things there. And this is in a size 18. Typically with patterns like this, they were marked in a size medium or a size large, so they covered multiple sizes, but this one is specifically a size 18, and it does not have a copyright written on it. This guy feels nicely folded at a glance, but when you flip it over, there is a bit of tissue peeking out, and I do not see instructions in there, which is unfortunate. This is a really cute but relatively simple tuck and blouse design with gathers above the bust and two different color options, and this does not have a copyright date on it either. This is a beautiful blouse pattern that I might actually have to keep to myself. Looking inside the envelope, it does have instructions and does have neatly folded pieces, but they are slightly creased as if they've been used before. The envelope for this one is also quite damaged with quite a few tears, but I really hope that all the pieces are in there because this is one that I'd love to keep for myself and make. I think the puff sleeve version is especially amazing, and I love the optional lace inset details. Though, if those lace inset details involve cutting the pieces, then potentially the tissue could be relatively butchered in there. This one is nicely folded, but definitely not factory folded. I do not see instructions in there. This has a relatively high collar that can be flipped out to create a lapel, and it's also got a relatively wide yoke that the fabric is gathered to. This envelope feels stuffed full, but looking in there, it also appears to be factory folded. I see instructions. This is, again, a relatively bulky coat, but this one does have a more traditional button closure. It's got a two-piece lapel or collar, and it's got large patch pockets. Here we have number 6219. This is a really cool dress. It drops below the natural waistline at the front. It has a matching belt. It has pleats in the front, but a relatively fitted back, and then it's got this kind of yoke that turns into a collar with gathers coming down from the front. It feels nicely folded in there, however, this is the condition of the back of the envelope. The instructions have just been pinned to it and are horribly tattered and in lots of different pieces. So I don't have a lot of confidence in the condition of this one. This one doesn't appear to be nicely folded, but the pieces aren't crumpled either, and I do see instructions in there. This is a really cool design. Again, it has a relatively fitted back, but the front has all of these draped pleated details. It has a seam down the center front, and the fabric is gathered at that point to create this draping across the bust, which is really, really flattering. You have either short, slightly fluttery sleeves, or you have elbow-length sleeves that have a similar ruched detail as you see at the center of the bodice. Really, really lovely design. Really hope it's complete. Here's another one that feels like it's folded in the bottom half of the envelope, so not particularly nicely, but the pieces also don't look crumpled. So they've likely just been used, and there hasn't been a ton of care put into the way they're folded, which is totally valid and honestly how I am with my own patterns. And I do see instructions in there. There's another lovely design. We've got a more flared design of the skirt with several pleats at the front. And then there's this interesting almost Y-shaped seam detail that goes down the center front and then up towards the center of the bust. And there are gathers sewn to that portion to create this draped detail around the neckline. And then it has dolman sleeves and a relatively high neck at the back. It's amazing for a relatively complicated design like that has so few pieces. It only has 9 pieces. So it could potentially be pretty easy to accomplish too, while looking very, very fancy. This is a vest or a waistcoat pattern. I'm not sure why they're called waistcoats, but that's what a lot of them are called. They describe this as being a waistcoat type jacket though. And at second glance, you can make this with long sleeves and have a proper fitted jacket, or you can just make it without sleeves and have a vest version. I actually really like this illustration with the matching round glasses and the striped shirt and the red vest. I just think it's really, really striking. This one looks to be really nicely folded, though at a glance it doesn't appear to be factory folded, and it does have instructions. This one has instructions in nicely folded pieces. This is another one I kind of want to keep for myself, but I actually don't think when the gathers start up that high that they're the most flattering on me, so I think I'll pass it on. This has scallop details down the center front and at the hem of the sleeves, and it's got a bow detail as well, which I love. Another blouse pattern I really, really like. The tissue appears nicely folded, potentially even factory folded. I probably won't keep this just because I have patterns similar to it, but it's such a lovely design. You've got that slightly off the shoulder dolman style sleeve, which is just so flattering, especially compared to modern sleeveless blouses that sit right on the shoulder and really expose the upper arm, which is an area I'm personally self-conscious of. And it's just got the perfectly sized collar as well. It's a really nicely proportioned, very classic pattern. This is a sleeping jacket, or as they call it, a bed jacket pattern. This is described as being easy to make. The tissue appears to be neatly folded in there, and it does have instructions. This number 6421, and this is a skirt slip or petticoat. It's a very lightly gathered petticoat though, and a camisole set. I really like the illustration on this. I think it's quite cute, and I think the garment design is quite cute as well. I can imagine this adding a really lovely amount of volume, as well as protecting you from any scratchy fabrics your skirt might be made from. This one feels like the tissue is mostly folded in the latter half of the envelope. When I open it up, I can't actually see any tissue, but I feel it in there. I do see instructions, but the top edge is tatty, which does not bode well for the condition of them. Depending on the condition of this one, I might keep it for myself. It just looks like a really nice slip pattern. You can make it either with a higher scoop neckline, or you can make it with a sweetheart neckline with little tiny straps. I like the length of this and the amount of volume it has. It looks like it would work well under fitted dresses from even the 1960s, or the afternoon frocks from the 40s, or the fuller styles that were popular in the mid-50s. The envelope for this one is not in the best shape. As you can see, I can open it right up, but it does have instructions in there, and the tissue appears to be nicely folded. This is what I mean when I'm saying that the tissue looks nicely folded, but not what I would typically consider to be factory folded, because the pieces aren't all bundled and folded together. They are separate, but they do look like they haven't been used before. And here we have another slip pattern. I find the illustration for this very odd with the lady on the scale. It's also weird for me seeing someone on a scale with shoes on, because I definitely take my shoes off when I weigh myself. At a glance, I see neatly folded tissue in there and nicely folded instructions. I didn't really describe this pattern, but there isn't a lot to it. It is a sweetheart neckline slip pattern with seams down the center of the bust. So you can get a little bit more fit than you can with something like this that just has darts at the front. This guy feels like it's factory folded. This is marked 1952. It's a relatively fitted, almost coat inspired dress, I would say, with this interesting scooped detail at the front and 2 buttons to keep it closed. And it's got a sort of interesting collar too. It's a notched collar, but it's very, very small. And it looks like, according to the illustration over here, that the collar and the cuffs are actually removable. This is one of the first patterns I took out, and at the front it appears to be in relatively decent condition, but then you fold it over and half the tissue's hanging out, and there are these big tattered pieces too. And I immediately knew that that did not bode particularly well for this lot. This is described as being an easy to make one-piece dress. It's got a very drapey back, as you can see, and then it's fitted at the front with gathers, and it's got a very full pleated skirt. This is another one where the tissue looks fairly crumpled and chewed up, but there is tissue in there and there are instructions, so that's better than some. And this is for a slightly less exciting design. It's a relatively fitted dress, and it looks like it's fitted with tucks below the bust and above the hips. This guy, the tissue feels a little bit more nicely folded, but very skewed to one side of the envelope, and it does have instructions in there, though the envelope itself is in poor shape. This is an interesting design. It's a very similar silhouette to the last couple we've seen, but this has a zigzag sort of detail at the front, which I really like. It also has these optional quite striking and interestingly shaped pockets. Here we have a pattern that the tissue for this one looks a little bit crumpled, but it is in there and there are instructions. This is an early 1950s design, maybe even late 40s. You've got gathering at the front and a relatively fitted back of the skirt to create a lovely, lightly flared silhouette. Then you have this really interesting gather above the bust, which you don't usually see, which extends into the sleeves. So I really, really like this design. I probably won't keep it for myself, but I do like it a lot. This pattern does have instructions and also has tissue coming out of the top. The envelope is quite tatty and torn, which is a shame because it's a lovely dress. You have a really, really full skirt and then a bodice fitted with multiple darts to really get that form fit to it. You've got a really nicely proportioned collar, and then you can make this with elbow length sleeves that have a little cuff at the bottom. And these are dolman or kimono sleeves that are cut in one with the bodice panels. I really like the illustration on this too, especially this design with the royal blue dress with the white hat that has a royal blue bow on it, and then you've got matching white gloves. This one feels neatly folded, though again it appears to be multiple pieces folded, so I don't think it's factory folded. This is a lovely, maybe late 1940s design. You again seem to have a removable set of cuffs and collar, which is interesting. The dress itself is double-breasted and lightly flared with square pockets that are placed diagonally to create a diamond shape, which I actually think is really flattering. I'm surprised you don't see that more often. And it has a pleated pleat in the back that aligns with seams at the back of the dress, which is really a lovely detail as well. This is Vogue 6657, and I actually have a copy of this in my collection as well. Might even be in the same size. But what's neat about this pattern is that it's very, very simple. It has 7 pieces, but the dress itself is made up of 2 main pieces, and then it's fitted with a tie at the waist. And I really like the simplicity of that, and I thought it'd be fun to try and make. Looking in here, the tissue appears to be nicely folded, but does not have instructions. So I might actually keep this one for myself and sell the version in my stash, because I think the one in my stash is in better condition. And this is so simple that I don't think I really need the instructions to accomplish it. I could always make a copy to keep for myself. This pattern has instructions and it appears to be very nicely folded. This is probably my favorite illustration of the bunch just because I love the bright emerald green color. I also really like the flared cuffs on this and the giant bow detail. This one I'm highly tempted to keep for myself, though now I feel like I should sell it since I'm not sure how much value the other patterns in this lot have. What I really like about this is that it's got a relatively full skirt, but the volume is sort of shifted to the back, which I think is a little bit more flattering because it means the front of the dress sits a little bit flatter to your body. And even though it has a lot of fullness to it, this doesn't look like something you'd really need a petticoat to go underneath of. And the more I'm talking about this, the more I want to keep it for myself. This guy feels neatly folded, like it might be factory folded. I do see instructions in there. This is a very fitted dress for the 1950s. It is marked 1953. You've got these interesting angular darts, which you actually more see this dart shape in the 1960s. And it seems to line up with pleats on the skirt that just provide a little bit of volume to go over the hips. And this has dolman or kimono sleeves that are cut in one with the bodice. This is an absolutely lovely design. You have this ruching on either side of the center front of the bodice, and then you've got that ruching mimicked on the sleeves as well if you make the elbow length sleeve option. The back is fitted with several darts, and then the front has gathering. It has a cute little flip down collar that you can also have flip up to create a notch neckline. I see instructions in there, and there's definitely tissue in there, but unfortunately we have some crumpled, torn tissue sticking out the top too, which doesn't bode particularly well for its overall condition. And then here we have one from 1954. This almost looks like a nursing dress to me, but I'm not particularly sure why. And when I say nursing, I don't mean like feeding a child nursing. I mean like something a nurse in a medical facility would wear. I think just because it's a very practical looking dress, it's somewhat loose, but then has a belt that takes it in and really cinches it to the waist, which would make it a really easy pattern to alter, which I always like to see. You've got a high neckline, you've got a seam down the center front, which again makes it easier to alter, and this has dolman or kimono sleeves that are cut in one with the bodice. So I really like the simplicity of that design. I don't know if I said, but it does look to be used. There's some slightly creased and crumpled tissue sticking out the top, but there are instructions in there, so hopefully it is complete. There are 2 other size 18 patterns in this lot that I already counted, and the first is this buttock pattern, which I think I'm going to keep to myself because it's missing like 4 pieces, and they're important pieces. And it's a really cool design. It kind of reminds me of a Vogue pattern that I eventually got rid of because it was just too small for me, but it had pin tuck details over the shoulder, and it just caused it to lay really, really nicely over the bust, and I liked it a lot. But this is kind of like that pattern on steroids because it has so many pin tucks over the shoulder, but I'm sort of eager to try that and see how it would look. And I feel like the various collar options they have on this are really nice and lovely as well. This buttock is from the 40s and it is just a suit set. You've got a lightly flared skirt and a relatively fitted jacket. And this one is factory folded and in great shape. So this one I'm definitely going to sell. But I have another stack of patterns to go through because this obviously doesn't add up to 70 patterns. Actually, I'm not sure how many patterns I received. As I said, I am waiting on another box, though I think it is primarily the larger size patterns. So these are ones that are different sizes. Right on top here we have a size 40 pattern, which is for a 40-inch bust and 30 and 43-inch hips. But sadly, all this has in here are instructions. So I'll probably just throw this in as a freebie or maybe put it up for like 99 cents and I can mail it to someone in an envelope if they feel like redrafting the entire pattern based on the diagram on the back, which some people do and is a totally valid thing to do. Then we have 2 size 16 Vogue patterns. This is a really interesting slip design. It has darts under the bust to shape it so you can get a really fine-tuned fit. It has this interesting kind of diamond shaped front panel, which I feel like would be difficult to assemble but looks really beautiful. It actually comes with a panty or a top pant set to make as well. And it's amazing that you can make all of that with just 8 pieces. I see instructions in there that look relatively sturdy and some nicely folded tissue, but is folded in the latter half of the envelope, which makes me think it's been used before. This guy has instructions, but they're folded down to about half their original size and kind of crammed in the bottom, along with some tissue. But hopefully everything is there because it's a really cool design. You've got a cape style capped sleeve detail going on. You've got some draping at the front of the bodice. It's fitted across the hips and then flares out below that. You've got this inserted gathered panel at the front. I don't feel like this is a very flattering design. Like, I'm sure it would look good on someone, and I'm sure the really unique details would appeal to someone, and I hope they find this pattern and buy it and love it. But to me, I don't really want like gathered swaths of fabric over my crotch and nowhere else. That isn't an ideal look in my eyes. This, however, I think is really cute. This is marked 1952, which kind of surprises me. Based off the style, I would think it was from the later 1950s. This is in a size 17, which is a junior size, which means it is typically cut with more room in the hips and a slightly narrower bust. So all of the size 16 patterns will have a 34-inch bust, and this one has a 34.5-inch bust, but 38.5-inch hips, whereas the size 16s probably only have 36 inches. I actually quite like juniors patterns for myself, since I am not particularly busty, quite a bit to accommodate in the hip region. Anyway, this is a pencil skirt design with pleat shaping at the waist, and you can also make a jumper dress out of this. So you've got these pieces coming down over the shoulders and a relatively fitted back. There's neatly folded instructions in there, as well as quite a bit of tissue, so hopefully it's complete. And then we have two patterns made for 28-inch waists. The first is an amazing slacks pattern that I want to keep for myself, but I really shouldn't because it's for 37-inch hips, and that means I'd have to add like 5 inches to the hips, and it's just not worth it. But oh my goodness, this is a beautiful pattern. So you've got fitted slacks with little tuck details, and you can also turn it into overalls or coveralls with this bib that they include a pattern for. The tissue appears to be really nicely folded, though perhaps not factory folded, and it has nicely folded instructions in there too. This envelope is very worse for wear, but there is some tissue in there. It's probably been used and refolded just based on the way it's folded, but it is in there and it has instructions too. This, I would say, is from the early 1940s, and you can make either a full length or a knee length skirt that lightly flares away from the body. And they have a few different waistband options in here too. You can have one that's rounded, you can have one that's ruched, or just a simple narrower one, which I think is the most flattering option, but that's not always the option that people want. Sometimes people want something more interesting, and I like that they have options that allow for that. Then we have 4 patterns in a medium. Earlier we had a pattern similar to this, and I said that they're usually in size small, medium, and large, and each of those sizes covers 2 different bust measurements. So small is typically 30 to 32-inch bust, a medium is 34 to 36, and then a large would be 38 to 40. This is a medium, and it is for various collars and cuffs and yoke details, and there's even a dicky in there. But I don't see very much tissue in there, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is incomplete, but it does feel nicely folded, which is good. This is a capelet pattern, again a size medium. This looks very nicely folded, potentially factory folded, and there are instructions in there too. This is a coat pattern in a size 34 to 36, which is basically the same as all of the other patterns. This is a coat pattern in a size 34 to 36, which is the same measurements as the previous medium patterns, though it's not marked as such. This is pretty similar to the other coat designs we've seen, where it's got those really boxy shoulders and a bias cut, lightly swing back, but the classic 1940s tailoring in the front. The tissue in here feels quite crumpled, but there is tissue in there and there are instructions too. And then we have one more size medium pattern. This one is for a cape. I love cape patterns. I think they're awesome, and this one's no exception. You can make a long or a kind of hip length version, and I see instructions in there and what appears to be factory folded tissue. We have one large pattern, though this has smaller than standard large measurements. If you look at the capelet pattern, it specifies small is 30 to 32-inch bust, medium is 34 to 36, and large is 38 to 40, whereas this is a size large and is marked as being for 36 to 38-inch busts. We have some insect or some mouse damage to the edge here. This edge actually opens up entirely, as you can see. That was a surprise. The instructions look to be in good shape, and we also have what appears to be factory folded tissue. So this is a good time to show you what factory folded tissue looks like. So it's just a single piece of tissue basically, and then all of the pieces will be enfolded inside the largest piece of tissue, whereas the other ones have had nicely folded tissue, but it's been in separate pieces instead of folded into each other. So this is a pattern that I would consider to be factory folded, and I wouldn't mess with that to count the pieces. I just label it as being factory folded. So despite the worn envelope, that does appear to be factory folded, which is great. And this is for a waist length cape pattern. I do find these slits in this to allow the arms out kind of funny, given how short it is. You could just have your arms come out underneath it, but it is a fashion statement, and sometimes a statement is the point of fashion. Here we have another size large pattern, and this one is again for 36 to 38-inch bust, so that's interesting. This is a really cool pattern. It's a very short waist length coat, but it's got this really voluminous swing style back and then elbow length sleeves. And it looks like the sleeves and the back panel are cut as one. Yeah, look at how goofy that piece is. That is a crazy looking back panel. I'd be really curious to see how this goes together, but it's not something I'd really wear, so I won't be keeping it for myself. It looks like it is factory folded. I see instructions in there, which is fantastic. Here we have what is probably the earliest pattern in the lot, definitely from the 1940s. The tissue looks neatly folded, potentially even factory folded, and there are instructions in there. This is for a 23-inch head size, which is actually a pretty large head size. I would not be surprised if that's the largest head size they make. Yeah, it comes in 21, 22, and 23, and I believe 21.5-inch head measurements is standard for the US, at least now. I don't know what it was 70 years ago. And this is for a relatively structured, boxy looking hat or a Turin style hat. And hat patterns I think are in pretty high demand, though I'm not sure if I've ever sold one before. There are two one-size McCall's patterns. The first one is for an apron, and this feels like it could be factory folded, which would be great, though the envelope has kind of seen better days. This is number 1376, and it's for a apron with this little Scotty dog detail, which is absolutely adorable. I don't know if I've ever sold an apron pattern either, though I do have quite a few. Maybe I should put that in with some other patterns and list a whole bunch of apron patterns at once. Actually, I changed my mind. I think this is earlier than the hat pattern. It might even be from the late 30s, but I'm not completely sure. I'm just going off the little bits you see of the hairstyle and the illustration style in general. And this is a one-size pattern for cuffs and collars, so you can make all of the different versions you see here. And there are quite a lot of versions. There's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So that is a whole bunch of different options you can make. And this feels absolutely packed full with tissue, which shouldn't be surprising given how much tissue there is supposed to be in there. So that'll be a fun one to count. We have a single one-size simplicity pattern. This is number 2644. Looking in here, it looks nicely folded. I do see instructions in there. I don't think this is a particularly valuable pattern, but I told this person I'd buy all of them. I was sort of hoping they'd give me a discount because of that, and I don't think they really did, so I probably should have been a bit choosier. But this shouldn't be hard to sell either. However, wow, I just flipped this over to put it away, and look at how heavily tanned the back of that pattern is. That is a pretty amazing difference. I wonder how this was stored to cause that. And tanning, if you're unfamiliar, is just something that naturally happens to patterns as they age or old paper. It depends on the way they are stored, I think, potentially on the way they're manufactured too. So here we have two patterns by Vogue. They're both from 1954, and this one is much paler than this one, and this one isn't even particularly pale. Like here we have another one from 1952, which is slightly lighter than this one. So it really is kind of amazing how that can happen. And actually here we have another good example of it. Here's a buttock pattern that has tanned, and then here's one that is quite a bit paler, though still slightly tanned itself. Every once in a while you'll get a pattern that is just beautifully crisp and pale and just looks fresh off of factory shelves, and it's amazing, but that's not too common. Here we have two of the printed buttock designs from the late 1950s or early 60s. This one is number 9927. Even though this is an older pattern, this is one I would have purchased with a lot, whether it's being picky or not, because this is a relatively valuable pattern, just because it is for party dress, which tend to go for a bit more. It looks like it is factory folded in there, and this pattern is absolutely stuffed with tissue. I don't know if you can tell, but it's about a ½ inch thick. So the fact it's factory folded is awesome, and I see instructions in there as well. This one appears to be factory folded too, and I see instructions in there. This one is in a size 12 for 32-inch bust, and it is just a woman's robe / flared duster with back interest. And I think I've actually sold this exact pattern several times over. Not like this specific copy, but this pattern number before, because it looks very familiar. And here we have another one that I probably shouldn't have bought if I was being a bit pickier. This one is just a simplicity pattern. It's a flared skirt for the 1950s for a 26-inch waist. This pattern is probably worth like $5 in this condition, so I won't make any money off of this one. But again, it was just more convenient to buy the entire lot than to pick and choose. And here we have two Vogue patterns that I don't know the size of because the size has torn off, and at this point in time they weren't marking it on the tissue and they weren't marking it on the instructions. So the way, or the only way you can really tell us by measuring the pieces and guessing based off of that. So that's probably what I'm going to end up doing. Both of these have belts, so I can compare the length of the belt to a belt in the size 18 pattern. And then this one has a fitted waistband that I can just measure and subtract the seam allowance from and subtract the ease from and get a relatively good idea of what size it's made for. Given that the majority of these patterns were a size 18, I feel confident saying they're probably size 18, but I don't necessarily want to sell them as such without knowing for sure. That is it for this lot so far. I will update you when the second box arrives and how much money I think I'm going to lose on this lot because, as I said, it was quite expensive. It was several $100s, and I think I'll make that back easily, but I don't think it's going to be a 6 times the amount I spent type of lot. I think it's going to be maybe doubling my money type of lot. And it's not a particularly easy lot to count and sell because none of these pieces are printed, which means I can't just double check the number on them and know they belong to that pattern. I have to really examine the size of each piece to make sure it belongs to that pattern. And since so few of these are factory folded, I'm going to have to count the piece of every single one. I recently had a lot where the majority of the patterns were factory folded and it was like blissful going through them. I went through 130 patterns in 2 days, and that wasn't even primarily what I was doing those days. That was alongside my other work. Whereas with these, it's almost half the number of patterns and it'll probably take twice as long. So that's not great, but that's the reality of buying patterns when you don't have a lot of information about them. It just be like this sometimes.